All right. As you already know, my name's Cory Biggs. I'm the Associate Director of Forward Arkansas. Hopefully, what I'm going to be able to share with you guys today is a fairly decent overview of the Forward Initiative. It's pretty new, and so it might be more of the 30,000-foot overview, but I do want to save some time at the end for questions, both for hopefully your benefit if I can answer them well, but also as our staff is getting things off the ground with this initiative. It's really informative for us to learn what questions the public has after hearing a little bit about us. So please be thinking of your questions as you go along. That would be very helpful. Here's what we're going to cover here today. Just real quickly, our vision, what we've done, what's happening now, and where we're going. Like I said, I'd like to save a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. For anybody who doesn't know, this is probably as good a place to start as any. Forward Arkansas is a partnership between the Arkansas Department of Education via the State Board, the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation here in Central Arkansas, and the Walton Family Foundation in Northwest Arkansas. And many of you who have spent time in Arkansas probably know from looking at this graphic, but I'll go ahead and explain it that this is probably the only time that these two foundations have ever shown up on the same sheet of anything. They've both worked a lot in education, but they have typically viewed things through a slightly different lens, or they've directed their grant making in slightly different directions. But I think the fact that you see the two of them together on this slide tells you a couple of things. First of all, that we are at a unique point, sort of a tipping point in education in the state of Arkansas. We've had a lot of changes over recent years, and we certainly know that we face some challenges as a state. But I think there's also a lot of opportunity right now with changes to federal law, some recently enacted state laws that have created some very, very unique types of flexibility that you see our public schools using. And I think there's a lot of momentum as well around the things that are happening, the changes that have been going on and building over the last few years. And I think you've seen these two names come together to try and capture some of that and to see if we can take our state to the next level in relation to our educational outcomes. I also want to pause here just to point one thing out, because as Dr. Ritter said, I'm a native Arkansan, and I'm incredibly proud of my state. I think that we've done some pretty incredible things, especially for being a relatively small state, both in size and population, and I think we should all hang our hats on that. But I can tell you, this is kind of I can talk bad about my family, but nobody else can. But since I'm a native Arkansan, I'll say that sometimes we limit ourselves as Arkansans. We think that because we're a smaller state, because we've seen our educational outcomes ranked 50th or 49th several years over the last however many, that it takes a toll on your psyche after a while, and sometimes we place our own limits on ourselves. I think this slide is very powerful just to look at the names that are up there. Rockefeller, Walton. There's no two names in this nation or the world that carry quite as much cachet as those two combined have the ability to carry when they walk in the room. And I think that's something that the two foundations joining forces hopes to spread as an attitude among those who are working in education in Arkansas, and I think it's something that we should really take pride in. This is an opportunity that we need to seize. So our mission is, as Dr. Ritter said, becoming a leading state in education by improving student achievement at a historically ambitious yet achievable rate, and closing the achievement gap within a generation. So we're setting the bar pretty low here. That's I did want to share this. I think this encapsulates really well the work that we're trying to do.
Imagine Arkansas at the forefront of public education, where every Arkansas student graduates prepared for success in college and the workplace. This isn't a dream for Arkansas, it's a vision. Our vision. Forward Arkansas is a partnership of local education, business, government, and civil society leaders committed to improving public education in the state. But Arkansas can do more than improve. Arkansas can lead. So Forward set a strategic goal: becoming a leading state in education by improving student achievement at a historically ambitious yet achievable rate, and closing the achievement gap within a generation. To get there, Forward engaged nearly 8,500 Arkansans through town hall meetings, focus groups, and surveys. We asked for your vision of public education in Arkansas, and we listened. We also conducted an in-depth analysis of Arkansas's educational system, including school attendance and performance, test scores, participation rates, graduation rates, college readiness, and more. It was a lot of data, a lot of discussion, a lot of insight. And Forward used it all to develop recommendations to meet the overarching goal and dramatically improve student achievement in Arkansas. But it's not just for students. We all feel the effects of strong public education. Proven benefits include more jobs, higher incomes, better health, rising home values, increased revenue, lower crime, and more community involvement. And if we don't invest in education, we all feel those effects too. Together, we can change the future of Arkansas education. We can do this, and we will, with your help. Share your vision for improving Arkansas education. Commit to being part of the solution, and learn more about the state of education in Arkansas at forwardarkansas.org.
Do we, first of all, happen to have any students in the room? Can I see a show of hands for anybody who's a student? Okay, fantastic. Got a handful. Do we have, how many professional educators do we have? Excellent. Or school administrators, and hopefully some of the professional educators raise their hands for that one too. Parents of students who are in school. That's great. And again, with some of the professional educators and school administrators. I know I see a few policymakers. How many people would identify as policymakers that are in the room today? All right. How many, this is knowing your audience here, how many professional researchers do we have? All right, a handful. Good. Well, thank you so much to everybody for being here. That's helpful to me as we go through this. You've seen our vision, you've seen our mission. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about our values. This is a conversation that I was having with Dr. Ritter before we got started today. The Forward vision was built from the ground up. And that's why you see the first word in these first two values here, community. We started at the grassroots level. We built up from there because we didn't want to have any assumptions about where we were in education in Arkansas or where people should go. We wanted those folks who know where they should go to tell us and for us to simply listen and learn from them. So you see community engagement is the first value. And I'm not going to read those word for word, even though you should, because there was an excellent amount of wordsmithing that went into all of those things. But community-based solutions is sort of the next linear step. That's what we hope to get out of that engagement. We know that there are, as you see right there, diverse needs across our communities. That actually leads perfectly into the third value, which is equity. And what we mean when we talk about equity more and more is that we mean geographic equity in the state of Arkansas. That's from zip code to zip code within the same county or the same town, but it's also, again, recognizing that the different regions of our state are facing different issues. They have different strengths, they have different weaknesses, and we all have to learn from each other to be able to help all of our communities get to where we want them to be, which is high achieving, high educational outcomes. Our fourth value is a shared vision, which actually is what I just talked about. It's having that constant flow of best practices and struggles, that constant flow of information back and forth from all of our communities, no matter which corner of the state they're in, to all of their fellow communities. And then fifth, this says innovation, but to me, this is really sort of the capstone on top of all of this grassroots level work. Once it's been built up, once there's a strong vision in place at the community level, and once the change for positive outcomes has become institutionalized, Then you can add that innovation piece on top of that, so that that strong institutionalized change narrative can have new information added to it. You can get new inputs and you can still have those same high quality outcomes, because you're not just playing whack-a-mole, you're not trying to put out whichever fire has come up today, or looking at one school year out. You're looking at 5, 10, 20, 30 years out, and you've got that strong vision, and you can adapt to the changes that will come in that time period. So here's a look at what we've done. This is what came into creating all of those values in our vision. There were over 8,500 surveys that were conducted under the leadership of our steering committee, which was 28 volunteer members from around the state. And they came from diverse backgrounds and all different points of view across the educational spectrum. There were over 550 focus group participants that were used for qualitative data. And so altogether, along with 100 hours of expert interviews, that was just shy of 10,000 Arkansans whose input was taken to develop where we are as a state. And a State of the State report was released by our steering committee a couple of years ago when this initiative first got off the ground. From that, some data analysis was done, which the folks from the REL and from OEP will appreciate. And we came up with a vision report, which was formally adopted unanimously, I would add, by the State Board of Education last September. And you will see here in a second that there were 7 focus areas that came into play there to create that one vision. If you look down at the bottom of this pyramid, those are the 7 focus areas. It became very apparent that pre-K, support outside the classroom, teaching and learning inside the classroom, school leadership, the teacher pipeline, particular attention to schools in academic distress, and systems and policies were sort of the 7 buckets, for lack of a better term, that those recommendations fall into. There are 95 recommendations in Forward's vision report, and those recommendations are for the state as a whole. They fall into those 7 categories, which makes them a little bit easier to wrap your head around. But you'll also see, I just want to pause on this slide, that clearly these things interplay. We've seen, just as examples from having visited certain communities around the state already, that to take one of the strands of today, diverse learners. We know that in certain pockets of the state, particularly Northwest Arkansas, we have a sizable and growing Hispanic subpopulation. We've had some of the school districts up there that have reached out and communicated to us that, in spite of the fact that that's been going on for a while and they've been making efforts, they still sometimes struggle to reach across the cultural lines to that subpopulation. And that's clearly an issue of support outside the classroom. We want these kids connected to the community. We want them showing up ready to learn at school. But it's also, it's affected by all of the other areas. In particular, it could be affected by, just as an example, the teacher pipeline. As we really pay particular focus as a state at the systems level to the teacher pipeline and developing that over the coming years, some low-hanging fruit for those communities, potentially finding teachers who come from those backgrounds that can help them bridge that cultural divide, or simply having teachers that have a very deep cultural competency and understanding of that can help to bring those kids up to speed, even if they're not getting the full range of support outside the classroom that we might be thinking of initially when we think about those cultural divides that exist sometimes. Just as you can see, there's the teacher pipeline issues. We have a teacher shortage in certain critical areas in Arkansas. I don't think everybody in the room probably knows that. And yes, we're going to start by looking at grow your own initiatives and things that are already going on that front, but also clearly effective leadership plays a role in that. We know that the Department of Education is working on creating more roles for teacher leaders so that they don't have to become a building principal or an administrator to have a leadership opportunity, that teachers can have a role to play in being a leader within their own career path in the classroom. And that's going to help with support and retention as well. So those two are clearly connected. Effective leadership clearly plays a key role in turnaround of schools in academic distress. And I think anybody who's ever had to deal in rules and regulations, and I should probably apologize for that up front, being a former staff attorney at the department, but you know that systems and policies underscores every one of these other six. So I think that's key, is pausing here and understanding that all of these things are interrelated. And even at that community and that school level, when we're dealing with these, we can't deal with them in a silo anymore. We've really got to think more broadly than that. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into each of the 7 buckets, but I'm not going to go too deep into them because, again, I do want to save some time for questions. But in particular, I wanted to focus on pre-K as the first one, which is going to be our key focus area for at least the coming year. We know that among our implementation working group, which is a volunteer committee of 25 folks, that's clearly risen to the top as a priority for them. And it was also the first thing that was very clearly delineated as a key focus area within our vision report. For us, we're going to be focusing on high quality pre-K. We've met with a lot of providers of early childhood education over the last few weeks. And just as a thought experiment, we often threw out the idea of, let's say you have $20 million. What would you spend it on? Surprisingly to us, probably not to anybody that's working in early childhood education though, none of those folks said that they would immediately try to open up new seats. What they said was, funding's been stagnant for about a decade. We've come through the recession. The thing that we really need to focus on is putting the money into quality for our programs. We've got very high standards for our pre-K programs in Arkansas. We're not searching for what quality means, but we are searching for the resources to make sure that we're meeting that high quality mark. So that's something that we want to lend our support to those who are working in early childhood education for. And pre-K also is probably the first stepping stone to the rest of our recommendations. Certainly, it's a nice segue into support beyond the classroom from a K-12 setting. And this particularly mentions this slide, health and nutrition, though we know from our early conversations with schools around the state that obviously there's a lot more than that goes into support beyond the classroom. It's really reaching out into that community engagement piece again. It pulls in the justice system, it pulls in economic development efforts. It's very overarching, though obviously within the K-12 setting we do want to focus on health and nutrition. Teaching and learning, this is an important one obviously. Each student is supported in developing the full range of knowledge and skills he or she needs to be successful in college and career. That's something that personally for me has been a mind shift, and I know there are some folks who are a little younger than me in this room for whom it may be different, but I know that even when I was in high school, you were either on a college track or you went into CTE courses as basically someone who was not going to college. That was the mindset. And for me, it's really been eye-opening to talk with some of these school districts around the state and figure out the things that they're doing, concurrent credit for some of these skilled classes that they're offering now. It's really about options, which I'm sure most of you who work in schools today know, but for me that's a concept that I think as a state we're still grasping because it's so new that we're talking about every child by the time they graduate from high school being able to go get a good paying job immediately if they want to, or to go to college if they want to. They can go get that job and they can go back to college a couple of years later or further on down the road if they want to. And I think that also ties in nicely to some of the other stakeholders that we're engaging here, like higher ed. They see that there's a problem with completion in higher ed. which is why you see some discussion about changes to the funding formula for our higher ed institutions. And I think what we also see on the flip side of that is that students who enter college at a later age oftentimes have a much higher completion rate than those who enter right out of high school because of this sort of old mindset that we have, that these folks are going to college and it was sort of whether they wanted to or not. So now we have a chance to explore some of these things more at the high school level and even before that. I just want to, before I go on to the next slide though, point out to you all the second word in each of these. Students, and here we're talking about each student being supported in the classroom. That's a key to us because that's where we know that we have to start, is with the students. I'm going to go on to the next slide though because I'm talking about now leadership and teachers. Leadership for us, we know that we've got a lot of opportunities here because of the changes that have recently come up. And right now we are conducting some focus groups around the state with school administrators as well as those who work for them to determine exactly what changes they may need. Again, that's just us listening and learning out of the gate. But we anticipate that there are some areas where we can assist in effective leadership, particularly, again, in some geographic regions of the state, and help that learning from one corner to the next. And the same with the teacher pipeline. This is obviously something that the Department of Education has spent a lot of time focusing on over the last few years because in some areas of the state we're coming up to a crisis point. But we want to treat that as an opportunity as well. Turnaround of schools in academic distress. We know that there's going to be a lot of changes on that front with the state's new ESSA plan for accountability. So that's an area where we know that we can play a role and hopefully assist in what people want to put into that. There's a lot of information that's being gathered on that issue right now. And lastly is the systems and policies piece. And I would just add one thing here, which is that some of these things that we're talking about may require a legislative solution at that state level. Pre-K funding, anything that involves funding. But more and more, we're hoping that we can have our vision align with other plans, particularly ADE's strategic plan, and that it can be a roadmap for education policy in the state. And that as policymakers, folks can have a new idea, but then they can go to the map and say, where does this fit in, or where does it not fit in? And we can all be moving forward in a very strategic way. Part of that is really focusing on the rules and regulations for education in our state, as opposed to always looking for a legislative solution. And we're excited about that because, especially for the educators in the room, the rules process is really a way in which educators can be much more engaged. You can help with the drafting in a lot of ways. You can provide vital public comments, and you don't have to worry about trying to garner 51 votes in the House and 18 votes in the Senate. It's a way to be engaged much more at that grassroots level and drive change in the direction that educators know that it needs to go. So what are we doing now? We have a formal partnership with ADE. We have a memorandum of understanding that was put in place, and we have a high-functioning team at the department, which is someone from each division that we're meeting with every 2 weeks. And we will be diving into each of those 7 key focus areas and building out from there with that team. We're reaching out to key collaborators. That includes Department of Human Services and folks who are working on that pre-K level. Obviously, key stakeholders within K-12, from school districts to people who contract with school districts to nonprofit agencies and folks who provide vital services across the state. Also to higher ed and career ed as well. And we're developing our community-based model, which is really going to drive the work in select places around the state. We want to find a cohort that we can use to sort of pilot the grassroots approach on implementation, much like we derived our recommendations from the grassroots. So we're working on our communications right now, traveling the state, visiting with folks who are interested. We're also bringing in some professionals to help with that. We're working on developing a true longitudinal data system from pre-K all the way through 16 in the workforce. And then we're looking into proper evaluation of all of that data as well, which I'm proud to say we've had some conversations with the folks at the REL as well. I mentioned earlier our 25-person working group that's going to be in charge of implementation. This is our advisory board, in a word. And you can see a very diverse group of stakeholders with great background in education there. And then we also, well, this is a little bit more detail about our communities. That's still very early on, but you can see we're excited to start providing technical assistance to the communities as well.